Sergey, I want to start with the panic, which in my opinion is spreading more and more in Moscow. Today, the Russian Foreign Ministry stated that the negotiations between the US and Iran were just a cover operation. And at the same time, the cunning Trump, though they don't mention his name just in case so as not to anger him, was planning a military attack on that country. It seems to me that this statement reveals the main secret, the main fear, Putin's main fear today, yes, and that of everyone in the Kremlin. You know, wasn't this the very spirit? Anchorage, trillion-dollar deals, multi-trillion being prepared, yes, deals for rare earths, all the gifts of the Arctic at your feet, they think in the Kremlin now. But isn't this also some kind of smokescreen and cover operation? And isn't Putin the next one on the mind of the unpredictable, yet fundamentally acting according to some plan? Donald Trump.
Well, we'd certainly like to have such a fairy tale, but in reality, unfortunately, that's absolutely not the case. There is a fundamental difference because Iran is a country that does not have nuclear weapons while the Russian Federation does have nuclear weapons. Iran is a country that Donald Trump has always hated and has said so, while Trump has always loved the Russian Federation and has said that he is a great friend of Putin. That's a fundamental difference. I don't think Putin faces anything similar to what Trump is doing in Iran. When you look at the details of what they said regarding it being a cover, that assessment is actually quite true and accurate because in reality, it functioned as a strategic and protective cover for Donald Trump during that entire period. You know, when you go into negotiations and at the same time bring together two American fleets in one place and simultaneously transfer a huge amount of ammunition and equipment, it's clear that you're not preparing for negotiations, but for war. Although this is still not a full-scale war, because Trump, despite saying that he does not rule out the possibility of sending soldiers to Iran, I think that is absolutely out of the question. So these so-called boots on the ground, they are not American, no. They will never end up there because otherwise, first of all, he would have problems with Congress and with Americans, since most Americans, by the way, do not support this war. Most Europeans do not support this war either. So in this sense, Trump is completely out of step with the whole situation. And for me, for example, it is absolutely clear that he started it only because last week, on February 26th to 27th, there were congressional hearings with former President Bill Clinton and his wife, during which they said, well, you've listened to the former president, now you need to listen to the current president and let him report to us on the Epstein files. And the next day, Trump started this war, which he had been preparing for 6 weeks. And I have the impression that he might continue it, perhaps even for quite a long time. Because it's not in his interest, on the one hand, as a state, but on the other hand, it is in his interest as a person who is mentioned several thousand times in the Epstein files. For me, this is absolutely obvious because this whole war is completely contrary to the logic of MAGA and the logic of Trumpism. Because Trump came to power not for the first time, but for the second time precisely on this slogan, that America comes first, that there is no role of world policeman and so on. And this war is absolutely contrary to all of that, and it is in opposition, it is out of phase with American sociology. And so when there is no such logic, neither military nor electoral, then you have to look for it somewhere else. And the only other place you could find it is in the logic of the Epstein files, that is, roughly speaking, to divert the public's attention from this problem, and so far Trump has managed to do that. So if we take a closer look at our region of Western Europe, let's say, for example, our country of France, on several of our major national news channels, the complex issue regarding the classified files is being discussed. The Epstein files have been the #1 topic for the past 2 weeks. But now, for 5 days already, no one is talking about it at all. That is, they've completely and irreversibly stopped talking about it. And on this subject, that's the impression I get. Putin, of course, by the way, the Russian Federation is economically benefiting from this war because gas and oil prices are rising. Naturally, global supplies are decreasing because about 20% of the world's oil and gas trade used to go through the Hormuz Strait. For gas, it's even a bit more. And Russia, now Iran, which used to supply 90% of its oil to China, is no longer doing so. And there's another thing here. Iran has heavy oil with additives, just like Russia does. So Russia can replace Iranian oil. That is, it can offer China to substitute this Iranian oil. So in this sense, Putin is at an advantage. Moreover, in the long term, he can even demonstrate this to China. Look, all your oil that goes through various straits, through bays, through seas, all of this depends on the geopolitical situation, but we have a direct border with you, which means it only depends on us. If we strengthen our pipelines, lay additional ones, maybe through Mongolia, or build the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline, then China will have no problems in the long term. And if previously this was considered a rather weak argument because China likes to diversify its suppliers, in this situation this logic might work, all the more so since this isn't the first time. China previously lost access to Venezuelan oil, which by the way is also heavy and comparable to Russian oil. And with Venezuelan oil, the situation for China is even worse because it actually invested heavily in Venezuela, reportedly around $20 to $25 billion. And this oil was practically free. Taking into account repayment of those debts, those loans, and now Trump is saying go ahead and buy this oil. So roughly speaking, China first invested, and now instead of simply receiving its oil for free as repayment for the loans it gave to Venezuela, it is being forced to buy that oil. So in this sense, so to speak, Putin is still sitting pretty for now. On the other hand, geopolitically, he is absolutely at zero, because no one is planning to involve him in anything. He was calling up some sheikhs in Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. To put it bluntly, they sent him packing because he has nothing to offer. He said that he simply has a direct line to Iran, and like, if you want to pass something along, do it through me. But he didn't even bring up this topic with Trump because Trump had already responded to this proposal last year.
He said that he called Trump, but Trump just ignored him.
Yeah, Trump replied last year, like, Vovochka, you should solve your problem with the war in Ukraine. Once you solve that, then we'll see what kind of mediator you can be in other matters. But I don't need you as a mediator here. So in this sense, Trump doesn't even consider the Russian Federation as a potential any kind of mediator. In this regard, Putin is an absolute zero. And by the way, he has lost geopolitical influence in the world. That is, he lost Syria, he lost Venezuela, and now he's losing Iran. And on top of that, nearby is Azerbaijan, which has distanced itself from the Russian Federation. And Central Asia, which has also shifted towards Turkey and China. So in reality, in this sense, the Russian Federation has lost out geopolitically, but so to speak, economically. In the short term, Putin might even benefit from this war.
Geopolitically, Putin has only just started to lose, at least in this region, because today the first Russian-assembled Geran drone struck the Saudi army. And now a lot of questions are arising. This is already at the very least aiding terrorism. Perhaps, but Putin is a paranoid person, you understand? The murder of Gaddafi, what kind of impression did that make on him? We remember, right? The killing of Ali Khamenei, I think he definitely paid attention to that. It intensified his paranoia. Politico writes that 2 of Putin's phobias have likely flared up again now. These are his physical survival and the survival of his regime. It seems to me not a very good mood. Still, that's what prevails in the Kremlin, especially since we understand perfectly well that if someone were to remove Putin, say, if Trump himself made such a decision, God willing, someday, it would not follow the Venezuelan scenario at all, and certainly not the Iranian one. All of this would happen at the hands of his own inner circle. Your version is that Trump is distracting attention from the Epstein files. And have you considered the version that Trump is gathering Trump cards using his own terminology ahead of his meeting with Xi Jinping? Venezuelan oil has been taken away from China. Now, if everything works out and goes according to the American plans, Iranian oil will be taken away as well. This axis of evil is being destroyed. And then, in this logic, what should Putin be afraid of? As of today, the third important trump card will be Russia, the Russian Federation. And that's when you can sit down at the negotiating table with Xi Jinping with a completely different attitude and rhetoric.
Well, first of all, these negotiations might not even take place. That is, frankly speaking, everyone says that they will definitely take place. I think that in such a situation, Xi Jinping might say that we'll wait until the end of the war, see how things turn out, and Xi Jinping could simply postpone these negotiations. Strictly speaking, he doesn't really need them. It's Trump who needs them more. So in this sense, it's by no means certain that
if Iranian oil ends up in Trump's hands, he'll come crawling to negotiate with Xi Jinping.
No, he won't come crawling because then China could just come and take Putin's oil instead. That's all there is to it. This is exactly the problem, because Putin has as much oil as he wants right now. Since he doesn't know where to sell it, suppliers are refusing it, and even India has turned it down. Thus, China can take what it didn't take before. Previously, it didn't need it because there was diversification, but now, on the contrary, Trump could actually push China into Putin's arms, and Putin into Xi Jinping's arms. So in reality, this is a very ambiguous situation. And moreover, I'm telling you, these negotiations might not even take place at all. That is, of course, if everything goes as Trump has planned, he will naturally have stronger trump cards for these negotiations. And the Chinese, who are no fools, might say, well, since he has stronger trump cards, let's postpone these negotiations for better times until he gets impeached in the US Congress. Or until he loses, for example, the elections, the November elections in Congress and in 38 states. And so when he loses all of this within the United States and impeachment starts looming over him, that's when we'll roll out the red carpet for him and say, well, come over, now let's talk.
You still haven't convinced me. If Trump comes to the realization that his last trump card is the Russian Federation, and that his final remaining hope for leverage might be oil for Beijing, then that will be the definitive time to engage in serious negotiations with the Russian Federation. Because no matter how much the Russian Federation puffs itself up and tries to look important, using their own terminology, it's a dish on the table, not a participant in the negotiations. For America and for China, first and foremost. Well, we'll see. With Iran, Trump really does have his hands full.